Our Hawaiian Volcano Summary for August 15th, 2024. Another week on Kīlauea has brought more filling of its summit and east rift, although ground information has now spread further in nav registers and stations around Puʻuʻōʻō. The USGS has released this INSAR satellite radar imagery that shows the difference in ground level between July 26th and August 7th. This is following the intrusion which occurred right around Mauna Ulu and Pauahi crater right through here. Well, this area over the past couple weeks seems to have been deflating slightly, with much of that magma migrating to the east and filling the area between Napau craters and Makaopuhi craters, more so around Napau. And that's why you can see the effects spreading as far as Puʻuʻōʻō by the time this image was captured. But it was just a couple of days later that we saw on the Puʻuʻōʻō tilt signal the registration of a tilt coming from the west. So you can see that this pattern began rapidly at first. It has slowed, but is still continuing ongoing at Puʻuʻōʻō with this inflation center to its west. Normally you'd see inflation by Puʻuʻōʻō crater itself on this blue azimuth right over here, but instead we're getting a tangential direction from the west. So that matches up with this map back in here. And last week we pointed out the station at Makaopuhi right in here, which was showing deformation. We'll add two more today. We'll show you guys the Kananui Ohamo station near Napau crater right in here, and also a Puʻuʻōʻō station as well. So to follow up on last week, we can see that the signal, we're looking at these 3-panel GPS plots for the last 2 years. So we're looking at this compressed amount of time on the right side of the graph, and we're concentrating on an up and down signal, especially because often that is a good indication of magma pushing from below, unless you have something funny with your fault line and bumps and that kind of thing. So we were noting that this station was rising for much of the past 2 weeks, and over the last week, it actually seems to perhaps be dropping, with the caveat that these most recent data points sometimes get cleaned up in the following weeks, and so we may see these migrate a little bit. But it does appear that many of the graphs in this area are showing this kind of pattern, so it does appear to be somewhat real here. So this area in the west was rising, is maybe now dropping. If we go further to the east to the station that's near Napau crater, that station, its up and down component, more recently started to rise and seems to be stabilizing, perhaps, maybe bouncing around a little bit right through there. And if we go even further to the east to Puʻuʻōʻō crater, that's this NPOC station, we can see that it's just now beginning to rise vertically, and it is also getting pushed to the east and the north, as you can see here. So all of that makes sense for an inflation center around that Napau crater, pushing the Puʻuʻōʻō crater to the north and east from the west. Earthquake rates have been fairly low overall. This is the last month. This peak of earthquakes back in late July was the seismicity which accompanied our intrusion between Pauahi and Mauna Ulu craters. So it dropped off. The intrusion has been continuing for a little while afterwards as the earthquakes migrated. So we believe that the feed of the significant supply of new magma slowed down or was stopped somewhere right in there. And so you have the continuing migration of magma that was already in the area pushing further and further to the east. And so presently we see that earthquakes are up a little bit in the last couple of days, but if we pull up the map, I can show you that this is concentrated in an area between Puhimau and Devil's Throat, an upper east rift right through here. Over the last week, there are still earthquakes ongoing in this middle east rift section right through here, corresponding to these shallow areas where the magma is migrating and redistributing itself all through here. So likely the magma is feeding through the upper east rift down into this middle east rift zone, and perhaps this connection near the summit, however that's configured, is responsible for extra activity of earthquakes in this area. So the summit is swelling, as is the middle east rift. So the supply may be coming up and perhaps splitting and feeding both areas, and that may be how you have sustained inflation in both areas at present, which you can see through the ground tilt signal at Sand Hill. So these two lines we've been following for a while. This green one points to the south caldera, which seems to be inflating as well as a central Halema'ama'o area, which is what the blue azimuth points towards. So that is Kīlauea. On Mauna Loa, we can share that the earthquakes at the top have been very few over the last week. And you can see earthquakes per day have really been less than 5 for much of the last week or so. We can look at the summit tilt on Mauna Loa and see some variations like there and a little bit here, which may correspond perhaps to adjustments on Kīlauea, which neighbors it to the south. And so those volcanoes push on each other and can affect each other's signals from time to time. But it also has this long-term pattern of inflation, of spreading the north and south parts of its summit caldera, moving further apart over time, as a result of magma still coming and recharging the volcano following its 2022 eruption. So if there are any signals from Kīlauea, they're fairly small, superimposed upon a longer-term Mauna Loa inflation signal, and there's not much else to report there. And that's our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week.